Sergio Perez has been under scrutiny for a while now because of his recent drop in form and failure to achieve Q3. There were lots of talks about how Red Bull were willing to replace him, hence the addition of Ricciardo to AlphaTauri, their sister team. But now, after a wall of silence from Perez himself, he has hinted at the possibility of leaving. But if he leaves, where will he go, and who will replace him? In a surprising twist, Sergio Perez has raised doubts about staying with Red Bull after 2024 and claims he wants to be in a team where he can make a real impact. At the beginning of this season, Perez was seen as a contender for the championship. He was just 6 points behind Max Verstappen after winning in Azerbaijan. But now people are closely watching how well he's doing, and we're not sure if he'll stay with the team. Right now, Perez has a contract with Red Bull until the end of 2024. But he's aware that this year the decision about his future isn't only up to Red Bull, but also up to him. There's some uncertainty surrounding Sergio Perez's future at Red Bull because people on the team have different opinions. Helmut Marko has suggested that they might change their driver next season, but Christian Horner, the Red Bull boss, insists that Perez will stay. In a recent interview, Marko said that in Formula One, nothing is absolutely certain. He explained that even though Perez has a contract, it doesn't guarantee his job. Instead, it's like an agreement on paper, which means things could change, like Perez going to AlphaTauri or not racing at all. Christian Horner is pretty sure that Perez will race for Red Bull next season. However, Perez is taking control of his future. He wants to be in a place where he can help the team, but if Red Bull isn't that place in 2024, he'll look elsewhere. Right now, Perez is all in with Red Bull. He wants to help the team win the Constructors' Championship and get second place in the drivers' standings. He says his main goal is to stay with Red Bull, win more races, and win more championships with them. He has a contract for next year, but he'll think about his options during the season. While Sergio Perez might be thinking about what he'll do in the 2025 Formula One season, the truth is he doesn't have many choices for the rest of the 2024 season if Red Bull decides to end his contract early. There are only 3 open spots for next season: Alfa Romeo Sauber, Williams and AlphaTauri. It's very unlikely that Perez would want to join AlphaTauri because it's a sister team to Red Bull. Williams also seems set on keeping Logan Sargent. He might consider going back to Sauber and replace Zhou Guanyu, which could be a sentimental choice since he started his Formula One career with them in 2011. Another exciting possibility is Perez returning to Aston Martin. He had his best years in Formula One when he raced for Force India Racing Point. However, he was let go after the 2020 season to make room for the team's owner, Lance Stroll. It would make sense if Perez replaced Stroll at Aston Martin, especially because Stroll hasn't achieved the results that Aston Martin could potentially achieve with Perez as the driver. The most probable situation is that Perez will stick with Red Bull for another season, but if there's a spot to fill in Red Bull, the top candidate is likely Lando Norris. He's a good friend of Max Verstappen, and Helmut Marko, who advises the team, has talked about him as a potential choice. Norris and Max Verstappen are really close friends when they're not racing, and this makes people think they might become teammates at Red Bull down the road. Before the Italian Grand Prix press conference, Norris said that he'd like to team up with Verstappen in the future. He thinks Verstappen is one of the all-time greats in Formula One. Norris said it would be cool to work with someone as talented as Verstappen and that he's open to competing against him to see how good he is. They've known each other since karting, and Norris even joked about Verstappen to join McLaren, hinting that he's interested in being teammates. People usually think it's best to be on a top Formula One team, but if you're not comfortable or feel like you're always being watched, other opportunities might seem better. Some drivers, like Valtteri Bottas, acted differently when they left top teams. Daniel Ricciardo's performance went down, but Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon got better after joining midfield teams. The seat next to Max Verstappen, who consistently does better than everyone else, is seen as one of the toughest in F1. It can be mentally tough to race against a teammate you can hardly ever defeat. Plus, dealing with negative media attention makes it even harder. Sergio Perez may not provide as much data and strategy help when Verstappen is way ahead in the Constructors' Championship, but Perez still gets decent results for the team. It's important to remember that other drivers have made mistakes in qualifying and had bad races on Sundays too. Perez might look worse compared to Verstappen, but given the situation, he's not necessarily doing a bad job. It might not be a smart move for Red Bull to let go of Sergio Perez. He's the perfect second driver. He's good enough to compete with top drivers from other teams, which takes some pressure off Max Verstappen, but he's not so good that he threatens Red Bull's main driver. Perez played a big part in helping Verstappen win his first championship. If they replace Perez, it could create problems between the team's drivers or situations where they have to pick one over the other. Red Bull hired Perez to be the second driver, so it's not fair for him to be unhappy about that. It wouldn't be smart for Red Bull to change things and risk messing up the current balance. You might have noticed that during race weekends, Helmut Marko and Christian Horner are usually with Max Verstappen's team, not Sergio Perez. Some F1 fans think Red Bull might be favoring Max over Perez. There were times, like in Baku this year, when Perez did better than Max, and it seemed to surprise the Red Bull team. Perez mentioned that Red Bull made some changes to his car setup before the Italian GP, which made it tough for him in qualifying. Before that, he was matching Max's lap times. It's not clear what Red Bull wants from Perez. On the other hand, Perez needs to fully accept his role as the second driver at Red Bull, which means regularly finishing in second place. Despite facing some challenges in the middle of the season, he's still one of the best second drivers in F1. There's also a disagreement between Marko and Horner, which doesn't help the situation. Some Red Bull fans, like me, wouldn't want to replace Perez with anyone else, even though he's in the number 2 position behind Max. It's unlikely that many top drivers would be okay with being clearly the second driver behind Max Verstappen. But in reality, we don't need to worry about Checo Perez. He's doing really well. He's one of the top drivers in the toughest racing league globally and is getting paid very well for his job. He's also a big sports star in Mexico, like Andy Murray in tennis. Although he might not be the absolute best, he's still among the top competitors. I'm pretty sure he doesn't see himself as a failure in any way. I can see Lando possibly joining that team in 2025, and maybe even Charles too. Liam Lawson had a great start in his F1 weekend, and Red Bull's Helmut Marko was really impressed. It seems like he has a bright future with AlphaTauri in Formula 1. At first, AlphaTauri didn't plan to have Lawson in Formula 1 for 2023. They chose Nick de Vries to race with Yuki Tsunoda. Then, when Daniel Ricciardo replaced de Vries, Marko didn't want to change Lawson's commitment to the Super Formula Championship. But things changed when Ricciardo injured his wrist, and they had to make some changes. Liam Lawson has shown he can quickly adapt, not just in his impressive performance in Zandvoort, but also in the recent Monza race. Being able to pick up speed quickly is a rare skill, and he's shown it in his racing career, especially when he's confidently passed Haas drivers in the last race. Marko, in a recent talk about Lawson's future in Formula 1, shared his optimism. He said that Lawson's performance in Italy proved he's really fast, which is a good sign. He also mentioned that Lawson is currently racing in Japan and doing well, even though it's not as famous as Formula 2. Marko hinted that if Lawson keeps doing well, he might get a full-time racing spot instead of just being a backup driver. Despite some recent criticism, the Red Bull Academy is known for developing talented young drivers. Sometimes they make quick decisions that people question, but if Lawson keeps performing like this, it won't be surprising if he gets a full-time spot with AlphaTauri next season. Or maybe even Perez's spot.